Let me tell you something nobody warns you about being ignored by a man who still keeps coming back. That distance you feel is not always rejection. Sometimes it's control. You're overthinking, checking your phone, replaying conversations, wondering what you did wrong. Meanwhile, he's comfortable because he knows you're emotionally invested. The truth is, a man can pull away and still be completely hooked. The real question is, are you responding with strength, or are you slowly lowering your value, chasing his attention like it's oxygen you can't live without anymore today? Right now, think hard about that truth seriously. Now, here's where most people get it twisted. You think his distance means you should try harder, love louder, prove your worth. That's exactly how you lose respect. A high-value mindset doesn't chase confusion, it observes it. When a man pulls back, your job is not to panic, it's to stabilize. Control your emotions, tighten your standards, and watch his behavior closely. Men reveal their intentions through patterns, not promises. You're not here to beg for clarity. You're here to recognize it. And once you see clearly, your decisions stop being emotional and start being powerful, deliberate, and fully yours. He pulls away, goes quiet, disappears just enough to make you question everything. But notice this carefully. He never completely exits your life. That's not confusion by accident. That's a pattern. A man who is truly done doesn't leave doors cracked open. He doesn't check in randomly. He doesn't like your stories weeks later. He doesn't send those casual messages that feel meaningless, but somehow pull you right back in. When a man keeps reappearing after distance, what he's really doing is maintaining access without responsibility. And if you're not aware, you'll mistake that access for genuine interest. See, emotional attachment in a man doesn't always look like consistency. Sometimes it shows up as control. He knows exactly how much presence is enough to keep you thinking about him. That, hey, how have you been? Text isn't innocent, it's strategic. Whether he realizes it consciously or not, it resets your attention back onto him. Now you're wondering again, analyzing again, feeling again. And while you're trying to figure him out, he's comfortable knowing he still has a place in your mind. The mistake most people make here is assuming that if he comes back, it must mean he cares deeply. No, it means he's not ready to let go of how you make him feel. That's a big difference. He's attached to the benefit, not committed to the responsibility. You bring him comfort, validation, maybe even an ego boost, but he's not showing up in a way that requires effort, accountability, or growth. And if you accept that halfway presence, you're training him that he doesn't need to do more to keep you. Look at the pattern, not the moments. Anybody can show up once. Anybody can send a message when they're bored, lonely, or curious. But consistency, that's where truth lives. If he pulls away every time things start getting real, every time emotions deepen, every time expectations rise, that's not coincidence, that's avoidance. And yet, he still comes back because he hasn't found what you give him somewhere else, or he hasn't developed the discipline to fully walk away. Now, here's where your power gets tested. When he returns, do you welcome him back like nothing happened? Do you ignore the gap, the silence, the confusion he created? Because if you do, you're telling him that your standards are flexible. You're showing him that he can disappear, come back, and still receive the same version of you. That's not strength, that's emotional availability without boundaries. A man who is truly hooked but emotionally immature will orbit your life like this. He won't commit, but he won't release either. He'll keep you in that gray area where you're not together, but you're not free either. And if you're not careful, you'll stay stuck there, investing feelings into something that isn't growing. You'll start justifying his behavior, telling yourself he's confused or going through something or not ready yet. Meanwhile, time keeps moving and your value keeps getting negotiated down by your own tolerance. Let's get something clear. Distance plus return does not equal love. It equals attachment mixed with uncertainty. Real interest doesn't leave you guessing for long periods. Real intention doesn't keep resetting the connection like a game. When a man knows he wants you, his actions become more stable, not more inconsistent. Yes, life happens, people get busy, but there's a difference between temporary space and repeated emotional withdrawal. And here's the part most people don't want to hear. You participate in this cycle every time you respond the same way. Every time you give him instant access after he's been absent. Every time you entertain him without addressing the inconsistency, you're reinforcing the pattern. You're teaching him that he can keep doing this and still have you. Strength in this situation isn't about cutting him off dramatically or playing games. It's about awareness and response. When he comes back, you don't pretend nothing happened. You don't reward inconsistency with warmth. You stay grounded. You observe. You slow things down instead of speeding them up emotionally, because now you're not reacting, you're evaluating. And once you start doing that, something shifts. Either he steps up because he feels the difference in your energy, or he fades away because he can no longer access you the same way. Both outcomes work in your favor, because at that point, you're no longer trapped in confusion. You're operating from clarity. That's the real power here. Not in figuring him out, but in refusing to lose yourself trying to. He says very little, acts distant, maybe even a little cold, but his behavior keeps telling a different story. That's where you have to stop listening to the silence and start watching the actions, because when a man's words and behavior don't match, the truth is never in what he says. It's in what he consistently does. And if he's still showing up in subtle ways, paying attention in quiet ways, reacting when you shift, that distance you feel isn't detachment. It's conflict. You'll see it in the smallest things. He watches your stories quickly, sometimes within minutes. He remembers details you mentioned casually weeks ago. He finds random reasons to reach out that don't really require a conversation, but open the door just enough. That's not a man who's indifferent. That's a man who's trying to stay connected without fully stepping forward. And if you're not paying attention, you'll dismiss these signals because they're not loud enough. But subtle consistency is still consistency. It just shows up in a quieter form. Now, here's where people get it wrong. You expect interest to look bold, obvious, and direct. But not every man operates from that level of clarity. Some men feel deeply but act cautiously. Some are dealing with fear, past experiences, or simply a lack of emotional maturity. So instead of stepping up confidently, they hover. They keep one foot in, one foot out. They don't want to lose you, but they're not ready to fully claim you either. And that creates this contradiction where their distance says one thing, but their behavior says another. Look at how he reacts to your presence. If you post something, he notices. If you pull back, he senses it. If you start giving your energy elsewhere, suddenly he reappears. That's not awareness. A man who truly doesn't care doesn't monitor your energy like that. He doesn't feel a shift when you go quiet. But a man who's mentally and emotionally invested, even if he's inconsistent, will respond to those changes almost instinctively. And this is where you have to be careful, because mixed signals can be addictive. They keep you hooked, trying to decode, trying to understand, trying to win clarity. One day he's present, the next day he's distant. One moment he's warm, the next he's unreadable. That inconsistency creates emotional spikes, highs and lows that make you feel more attached than you actually are. You start focusing on the moments he shows interest instead of the pattern of his behavior. But here's the reality. Contradictory actions are not a green light. They're a warning sign. It means he hasn't decided how he wants to show up in your life. And until that decision becomes clear and consistent, you don't treat his small actions as proof of big intentions. You acknowledge them, but you don't build expectations on them. A man who checks on you occasionally but disappears when things require effort is not showing commitment, he's showing convenience. A man who reacts to your energy shifts but doesn't create stability is not leading, he's responding. And there's a difference between a man who wants you and a man who doesn't want to lose access to you. One moves toward you with clarity. The other lingers around you with hesitation. Now let's talk about your role in this. When you notice his actions contradicting his distance, do you immediately lean in? Do you reward those small efforts with full emotional availability? Because if you do, you're amplifying inconsistency. You're telling him that minimal effort still gets maximum access. And once that becomes the standard, it's very hard to change. Instead, your response has to match reality, not hope. If he's inconsistent, you become measured. If he's unclear, you stay grounded. You don't chase clarity. You let his behavior reveal it over time. Because when you slow down your emotional investment, you start seeing things for what they are, not what you want them to be. And here's something most people overlook. When a man's actions contradict his distance, it often means he's internally conflicted. Part of him is interested, drawn to you, even hooked in some way. But another part of him is holding back, whether it's fear, timing, or lack of readiness. That internal conflict is not yours to fix. You don't resolve it by giving more, loving harder, or proving your worth. You resolve it by maintaining your standards and letting him meet them. Or not, because at the end of the day, interest without direction creates confusion. And confusion, over time, drains your confidence. You start questioning yourself instead of questioning the situation. But once you understand that his mixed behavior reflects his uncertainty, not your value, you stop internalizing it. And that's where your control comes back. You stop reacting to every small signal. You stop overanalyzing every action. You observe, you assess, and you respond with intention. Because now, you're not trying to figure out why he's inconsistent. You're deciding whether that inconsistency fits into your life at all. The moment you stop chasing, something shifts, and it's not subtle. The energy changes. The dynamic flips. Suddenly, the man who was distant, slow to reply, or emotionally unavailable starts showing signs of life again. He texts more. He reacts faster. He finds reasons to re-enter your space. That's not magic, and it's not coincidence. That's a response to lost control. Because when you were available, predictable, and always leaning in, he didn't have to do anything to keep you. But the second your focus moves away, his attention sharpens. Understand this clearly. Attention follows uncertainty. When he's unsure about your availability, your feelings, or your interest, his mind starts working overtime. He starts wondering who else has your attention. He starts questioning whether he misjudged your level of attachment. And that curiosity creates movement. Not necessarily commitment, but definitely attention. Because now he's no longer in a comfortable position where he knows he has you. Now he has to think about you again. You'll see it in how he reacts to your absence. When you stop initiating conversations, he notices. When you take longer to respond, he feels it. When your energy becomes more focused on your own life instead of revolving around him, he senses the difference. And that's when he starts leaning in. Not always directly, but enough to pull you back. A random message, a casual check-in, maybe even a little more effort than usual. It's just enough to reopen the door. But here's where you need to stay sharp. His increased attention doesn't automatically mean growth. It doesn't mean he's suddenly ready to step up, commit, or be consistent. It means he felt the shift, and now he's responding to it. There's a big difference between a man who changes his behavior because he values you and a man who reacts because he feels you slipping away. One is intentional, the other is reactive. Most people lose their position right here. The second he comes back with more energy, they drop their guard. They start responding quickly again, giving more, investing more, hoping that this time is different. And just like that, the dynamic resets. He relaxes again, the urgency disappears, and you're right back in the same cycle. Not because he played you, but because nothing actually changed at the core. Only the surface behavior shifted temporarily. You have to recognize the difference between a spike in attention and a shift in character. A spike is short-term. It happens when he feels the loss of your energy. A shift in character is long-term. It shows up as consistency, clarity, and effort over time. And if you treat a temporary spike like a permanent change, you're setting yourself up to repeat the same pattern. Now let's talk about why your energy matters so much. When you're constantly available, constantly giving, constantly prioritizing him, you remove the need for him to invest. You make it easy for him to stay comfortable. But when you redirect that energy back into yourself, your goals, your growth, your peace creates space. And in that space, he either steps up or steps back. There's no more free access. That's why self-focus isn't a game. It's a standard. You're not pulling away to manipulate him. You're pulling back to realign with yourself. And that shift is powerful because it's real. It's not about pretending to be busy or ignoring him strategically. It's about genuinely having a life that doesn't revolve around his inconsistency. And when that becomes your reality, your energy changes naturally. You respond differently. You expect differently. You carry yourself differently. And men feel that. Even if they can't explain it, they notice it. The tone of your responses changes. The urgency disappears. The emotional weight you used to carry for him is gone. And now, he's the one trying to figure out where he stands. That's when his attention increases. Not because you did something to him, but because you stopped overextending yourself. But again, attention is not the goal. Respect is. Consistency is. Clarity is. If his increased effort doesn't evolve into something stable, then it's just another cycle starting over. And your job is not to get excited about temporary effort. It's to observe whether that effort is sustained without you having to chase it. Stay grounded when his energy rises. Don't rush to meet him where he is. Let him come to you consistently. Let him show you over time that this isn't just a reaction, but a decision. Because when a man truly decides, his behavior doesn't fluctuate based on your distance. It stabilizes regardless of it. And that's where your power really sits. Not in making him chase, not in triggering his curiosity, but in maintaining your position. You don't move based on his inconsistency anymore. You move based on your standards. And if he meets them, he earns access. If he doesn't, you keep moving forward without needing to force anything. Because once you stop chasing and start choosing, everything about how you experience him changes. He keeps just enough of a connection alive to stay in your thoughts, but never enough to build something real. That's the space where confusion grows, because you're not being ignored completely, and you're not being chosen clearly either. He sends a message at the right moment, shows a little interest when you start pulling back, gives you just enough attention to remind you he's still there. And if you're not paying attention, you'll start calling that effort, when in reality it's maintenance. This is how emotional engagement without commitment works. He creates a rhythm where you're always slightly invested, slightly hopeful, slightly waiting. You're not secure, but you're not detached either. You're in the middle, trying to interpret signals instead of receiving clarity. And that middle space is where your standards quietly start to drop, because you begin to accept less than what you actually want, just to keep the connection alive. A man who operates like this understands something very important. He doesn't need to fully show up to keep you. He just needs to show up enough. Enough to trigger your emotions, enough to remind you of the potential, enough to make you question walking away. That almost feeling becomes addictive. You start holding on to the idea of what it could be. Instead of facing what it actually is, watch how he communicates. It's rarely direct. He doesn't define things, doesn't create structure, doesn't give you certainty, but he also doesn't disappear completely. He floats in and out, keeping the door open without ever stepping fully inside. And every time you try to get clarity, the conversation either shifts, slows down, or becomes vague. That's not a lack of understanding. That's avoidance. And here's the part that's easy to miss. He benefits from this setup. He gets your attention, your energy, your presence without having to meet the standards that a real relationship requires. No accountability, no consistency, no pressure to grow. And if you continue to engage at that level, you're reinforcing the idea that this is enough for you. Now, let's talk about how this affects you over time. At first, it feels exciting. The unpredictability, the emotional highs and lows, the small moments of connection, they create intensity. But intensity is not the same as stability. And over time, that intensity turns into exhaustion. You start thinking about him more than you should. You start analyzing things that should be clear. You start feeling emotionally drained from something that isn't even fully defined. That's the cost of staying emotionally engaged without receiving commitment. You give more than you're getting, but because it's not zero, you convince yourself it's something. And that's where self-respect gets tested. Not in big dramatic moments, but in quiet decisions, like whether you respond to that message, whether you entertain that conversation, whether you allow the cycle to continue. You have to recognize that access to you is valuable. Your time, your attention, your emotional presence. Those are not things to give freely to someone who hasn't shown the ability to handle them properly. And when you continue giving without receiving structure, you're teaching him that he doesn't need to rise to meet you. He can stay exactly where he is and still keep you engaged. Breaking this pattern doesn't require confrontation. It requires clarity within yourself. You stop responding to inconsistency like it's normal. You stop rewarding minimal effort with full attention. You start asking yourself a simple question. Does his behavior match what I actually want? Not what I hope for, not what I imagine, but what is consistently being shown. And when the answer is no, your actions have to reflect that. Not emotionally, not dramatically, but practically. You pull your energy back. You become less available to confusion. You stop participating in conversations that go nowhere. You stop allowing someone to occupy your mind without earning a real place in your life. Because the truth is, if he wanted to commit, he would start aligning his actions with that intention. Not perfectly, not overnight, but progressively. There would be movement, direction, effort that builds, not just moments that reset. And if that's not happening, then what you're experiencing isn't something that's growing. It's something that's being maintained. And you have to decide whether being maintained is enough for you. Because once you see the pattern clearly, staying in it is no longer confusion. It's a choice.